Hello, I'm Margot Dwyer, a writer from Scranton, a Green Ridge native, but now I live in Northampton, Massachusetts, and I'm just thrilled to join some of my favorite poets here for Poetry Month. So I'd like to start with a poem called Reality Show. The Real House Cats of Beverly Hills. You've never seen catfights like this. Perfect is your best ally, unless you're sitting in her sunbeam. Beware, this kitten has class and claws. These felines enjoy their fine nine lives: catnip labyrinths, Louis Vuitton scratching posts, beluga caviar on silver spoons. Outrageous? Perhaps, but don't we all share the need to need? Melt into a nap, be held, comforted? Spoiler alert, a single ball of yarn could unravel it all. Dancing on the stars. Gravity meets fame. In this stellar series, 12 astronauts pair with professional dancers to learn tap and jazz. Will these high steppers land the salsa on Saturn? The Lindy Hop on the lunar surface? Merengue on Mars? How free can you be when there's no fear of falling? Tune in Sunday for a show that's literally out of this world. Alien Bachelor. This eligible extraterrestrial is looking for his one human love. Get into the alarmingly high-functioning brain of Alien Bachelor as he woos lucky candidates on romantic adventures. Flying saucer rides through meteor showers, slow dances in the dying light of zombie stars. As you progress in the series, take the spaceman to meet your parents. He will take you to meet his leader. Follow the interstellar journey as Alien Bachelor presents space modulators. For an alien, a single red rose means now I julienne you and your hometown into matchsticks. Can you develop trust with a non-human? Can true love thwart war of the worlds? Will you eat astronaut wedding cake together, or will he eat you? Stay tuned. So I find a lot of fiction in reality and a lot of reality in fiction, and part of my poetic project is exploring the places where that intersects. Plus, it's just a lot of fun to really stretch the imagination, and then of course see where it overlaps with what we are told is reality. And this next poem is inspired by a building in Scranton, a building that's inspired me for most of my life, and recently in the past year I've been exploring it more directly in verse, and it's called Scranton Lace. Broken windows fake awake like glass eyes, lids locked after the heart stops. There is no next when you're used, nothing new. Scranton Lace, elegant ruin, abandoned since her last bell rang. Lace cutters fired mid-shift. Time unties when the big clock breaks. Despite shiny wreaths, doesn't every graveyard choke with weeds? Headstones so bored, the undead aren't sure where to haunt. Dates faded, names imbibed by marble. In vulgar Latin, lace means entice, ensnare. The lace tricked me every day as I drove to school. Gutters buckled where sick sparrows nested. Once grand banisters flaking rust. Dust, love letter of age, how dare you? Lace lives in rewind, tin migraine after a glue high. Each gear taunted by the memory of spin, desperate to grind. Blades aching to cut. No money to repair it, tear it down. Welcome sign still floats above closed doors like elixir so old it's turned to poison. A slow stripping inside. In the parking lot, I slept off my first hangover, learned how much whiskey I needed to black out. One fist. I'm a slow learner, but I've always understood lace, negative space, code of openings, frames blinking between braids. Lace is a woman who is here and nowhere, intact but full of holes. Lace is an old curse, and after the reversed spell, the ruined part of you never fits quite right. Lace is a ruse, two-sided mirror, see-through, so many faces hiding within one. And while the Scranton Lace Buildings lives in a world in between worlds, and connected to the reality show poem that I read earlier, is a new project that I'm working on, which is exploring anti-heroes and why we're drawn to some anti-heroes, why some villains seem to repel us while others pull us toward them. And so you might be familiar with a little film called The Little Mermaid, and this is a persona poem about the villain of The Little Mermaid, Ursula. It's called Autobiography of Ursula. 1. Yes, I'm a sea witch. I tricked Ariel. But don't ask me to apologize. Don't call me a villain. I'm the last realist left. I magicked mer people into polyps, so what? King Triton knew. You have to fight dirty to get through. Flotsam and jetsam, my electric legs, my true brood, understood. I might be filth, at least I'm not rude. 2. My last memory before I died, heat. Flames erupted in my chest as the spar skewered my spine. Old wood, I thought it'd break like a beak. It didn't. Plasma gushed where my 3 hearts hummed. The deeper the cavity, the harder to plug. Like echoes in a cave carved so low, gravity loses track. No cartography can trap it. 3. I invented underwater lipstick. I was the first artist to store hearts in jars. I was the only sea witch in history who could boil blood into stone. I bit lightning to the bone, rode electricity to the node. Ariel begged for legs, I gave her legs. Mer people wouldn't know gratitude if it slapped them in their scales. I floated graveyards so ghost ships could sail. I'm the last hope of hydrogen, oxygen. My mother is mad science. Don't dress me in that trope. It won't fit. 4. Say my name. In the word hides an urge. I live in whatever world I want. Seabirds scream on deck as my black hair traps jet streams. Thunderclap ripped birth into my body, like surgery in reverse. Purple killed white as I spilled myself through my tight wedding dress. My mollusk brings all the boys to the yard. 5. Wind blows eyes open. Fire signs the scroll. Can you really blame me? I wanted to play. They wouldn't let me. It was my turn to try the trident, stir the sea. Water rewound like a redacted vow. Charybdis flung gold rings back to ore. Every sundial lies. Only a whirlpool can tell time as it devours hours. Ah, Ariel, counting seconds before dusk. Days nest into weeks, months into years. Yes, time is invisible, but the end still pulls her, me, all of us, like an underwater waterfall. 6. I died, but it was not all for naught. As the sea burned, my death-fed, eyeless knits burrowed in silt. Now I'm marooned on sand, so taut and dry I can't cry. I miss ocean, my hammock of tide, coral reefs under feet. I miss the tickle of my gills. Crying underwater is so underrated. I hope Ariel tattoos fins on her wrists so she never forgets the price of pain. From here I watch it spin, secret moons, sun like a coronet. I know now why the globe is a ball. Orbs can roll, always stay lost. If you haven't seen The Little Mermaid in a while, I highly recommend that you get onto YouTube and watch a few clips. It's very captivating. This last poem is called My Money, and I'd just like to thank everyone here for being here, and again, for Tom and Craig bringing me here. My money. My money's on the guy in last place, the runt of the litter, the bloody knee. My money's on the missing sock, the single Lego, the lock with no key. My money's on the run-on sentence, the misplaced comma, the fail. My money's on the deer in headlights, one white whale. My money's on the introvert, B-, C+, barely audible. My money's on the, ubiquitous, unanimous, invisible. My money's on the iffy, the jinx, artist screaming in the park. My money's on the blinking cursor, the negative space, the space bar. My money's on the secret wing, the gelfling, girl eating alone in her car. My money's on the sun shower, spring snow, the healers, the confused. My money's on the paddling, the flat tire, spinning wheel, the bruised. My money's on the fading tattoo, kind-hearted outlaw, the dented and darned. My money's on Sisyphus. Sure, the hill is high and rock is heavy, but look at those arms. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tom Lomain. I'm going to read from my recent book, Blues from Paradise, that came out from Foothills Publishing in November. Some of these poems are Scranton-related, and I'm sure you may recognize some of these sentiments. The first one I call The Landing in My Boyhood Home. I grew up in a house, nice big old house in Greenridge, and there's a landing in the house. That's what this poem's about. Really, it's about childhood. The landing on the stairs I fell to each morning and rose to every night, into and out of the light and sounds I knew so well by then. Slipped past the huge stained glass windows, never opened over the blood colors of Persian rugs. Tricking the sun in sword fights by day and sticking a dagger of moon into your back at night. Either way, a duel, and the death of a day or a night. I never could sleep through it without pages of something else spread over my face. Escaped from the haven of dark wood I didn't count then as wealth. But it was a midway place from and to whatever I would be years collecting to define. The bright kitchen that fed me up and down to it the back way. And there was a bench built into the wall with a burgundy cushion, the full length of it, as I recall. But maybe I dreamt that part, as I have so many other things about so many other landings. I do know for sure no one ever sat there for long. Childhood, right? You don't have it for long. This is my grandfather's books. My grandfather came from Sweden and ended up living in Archbold. This is kind of about him. An elegant man, as I understand. He died on my birthday when I turned 3 years old, which is in this poem, my grandfather's books. Musty books my grandfather read, years on these shelves melting into themselves from an age of canopied beds, where there was time for pocket watches and leather chairs, cigar boxes and afternoon cocktails, town squares and parasols. Sepia still life of the Swedish family, well-dressed people set in different rooms, ornate in gold leaf frames pressed behind dusty glass and cartons on the storage room floor. He died on my birthday when I turned 3, leaving a cup from the king and royal stories yet to gain air of academies and yachts from Sheepshead Bay, somewhere between an Archbold pub and the Scranton Elks Club. A fool to think these miners would know his brown volumes were more like freedom than wages. The pages crumble now if you turn them like sand. This Pennsylvania coal town wasn't Stockholm, and talk of him I hear was of the smoothness of his hands, nothing like theirs, not a worker's, no soot on his clothes, yet he could drink with the best of them, and give vested discourses on faraway themes like the sea, holding his tavern crowd in a dream as they gazed at his brass-tipped cane. His grave, in the plain dirt of America, beside the Irish wife he found here, holds his manicured bones. But these tomes he read and sold in turn to those who would listen, mark the parenthetical elegance of his brief mission on earth. Read a couple Scranton poems now. This one called Black Thumbprints. Now, no one is proud of the coal town blood, teased into believing that the past of rail cars and mines is a stain, not a badge. Poised at the edge of papered time's comb, carefully rinsed from the corners of eyes, this resume lacks the black thumbprints on the time cards of our youth. We must all become lawyers to sue away the rust of our chiseled days in the dust yard. Politicians promise sunshine through our great lead clouds if we just hold our breath while they introduce us around to the nodding new investors they met in some trophied place far away from here. This one. Mayoral proclamations. We love our mayoral proclamations in Scranton. The mayor could proclaim Dirty Fingernail Day and we would believe him, spread our hands proudly for the tellers at the bank. Ancestors coughed loudly at the punchline of a joke and swilled whiskey at card games. In the parlor, the mayor would proclaim the best brothel in town for the sailors who came on trains from the coast, and we would believe them when they said they won the war. The mine boss might admire the hands of a dirty man, though not the man. So the mayor might proclaim him king of Scranton for a day, and we would believe it because hard work rules, and we know it because his tools are in the museum the school children go to see. The mayor may even greet them at the door, future voters, those who decide to stay, and he should proclaim, "This is School Children Day," and we will believe him once more, because we love our children here. The Bishop's Ring. Everywhere in this town, you see priests getting shoe shines, getting out of big black cars to and from church on time. In the shadow of bishops past, they run prep schools and colleges, editorial opinions on everything from celibacy to the frequency of childbirth, and the old ones have great raised eyebrows when the baskets for the new brass doors come around. They're toastmasters and poets and Chamber of Commerce personalities touring with Dutch investors, the red brick remnants of our town's great holy past. Forgetting about the whorehouses the foreigners never heard of in the courts near the newly named Archbishop's Avenue. They must use mirrors to multiply, I swear, because behind every upscale menu hides the black and white collar. The kiss smooth celebrity bishop's ring on an alabaster finger gleams, and everyone, from coal baron to landfill king, seems to know just how to catch its light. Altars. You see there's some relation in the themes here. The history of this place, altars and dog holes, spires and fights, the gravel voice of songs that might have been sung. How we've tried to vote ourselves out of the mines, the drinking life of shaft disasters and lunch pails, the rusted glory of tin helmets with gas lights, and tales of brave rebellion before cold magistrates. The timeless, awkward prostitutes, not quite museum pieces, probably don't know the special similes of the town they work today. The choking death of old men alone beyond the lease of nurses with memories of their own bony fathers face down on the bar. Scar tissue of the bishop's robe and the little flags at gravestones that seal it all in the wind. How far from the deep vein we steer our blind mule carts emptied of the blood of heroes. The forgotten miner searching amid his private slag robs his own ghost pillars to claim his fear and hurt in the ambulance twilight. The packaged eulogy in a vacant church leaves out such details. This one, Fallout. Those who might be in my age category would remember when we had to do these things. We used to get under our desks or walk single file toward the yellow sign for the fallout shelter in the basement, wait to come out into the ruins after the attack in our maroon St. Paul school uniforms. We knew there'd be nothing left but crumbling brick and burning cars. Our pets would all be dead. After lunch, the nun would misconstrue history again, omitting the parts you might learn something from. At 3 o'clock, would walk home, nervous that it could all be gone, quick as the push of a button. But we played army with sticks in the backyard anyway, counting to 100 to resurrect ourselves after being gunned down before the call to dinner. We were all little sinners to the loud Monsignor who intimated how a litany of prayers could save us. And still we wait, all these years later. And the last one I'll read from my book Gray Area that came out 2004. This particular poem I wrote one afternoon. I was driving and pulled myself over because it came to me to write this. And it didn't make much sense at the time, but it was September 7th, 2011 that I wrote this. And as we all know, a few days later, everything kind of changed in our world. And it seemed to make some sense to me later. Bloodline. Although I may seem civilized now, I think you should know, somewhere in the lost history of my cold blood, Vikings left their farms and fish boats for the Gaelic coasts, the rivers and shores of a trembling Europe, blessed with the hammers and swords of their fierce warrior gods to render unto others the fury of the north. Berserkers on Thor's Day, the dragon glory of Valhalla, where the brave may live forever, sought on the fallen backs of hapless villagers below, captives from feral Germanic clans as spoils of their raids, brought home to the fjords and cold mist of the inner Scandinavian peninsula, who bore them, children by force, filled with the same icy Nordic ire that hides but does not die or end over time, however long away the line runs from the source. And some of them, my friend, were ancestors of mine. Thanks.
I'm Craig Chury. I'm a native of the Back Mountain, graduate of Dallas High School, 69. And I live in the Springville Schoolhouse north of Tunkhannock, where I've spent the last 3 years hitchhiking up and down Route 29, conducting interviews with gas workers and farmers and landowners and anybody who picks me up in the heart of fracking land. I'll read to you a series of poems that I've constructed from those interviews, from the voices of the people who live underneath all that noise. The selection that I've chosen is going to tell a story. A woman's body grows to resemble the rolling contours of the earth, and a man's face grows to resemble her stony crevices. This goes way back. A vision wrought with echoes, Abraham said, in both the Bible and Quran. I live in this town. I live in that house. That's my room. My bed against the window, curtains, cowboy woven pistols and lariats. I hide my baseball cards in a hat box under my bed. I got 3 Mickey Mantles, a Roger Maris. I got every 57 Yankee, Moose Scourin, Cleet Boyer. My sister isn't dead yet. You can hear her singing the Platters. Yes, she's the great pretender through the walls, through the flower print wallpaper, cigar smoke stained, fried bacon, liver and onions. At night, from the kitchen window, from the back field near the pond, from your truck swerving potholes, your story augurs deep through a tangle of roots, home or far from home, lit by a tower of stars, written in earth and water with flammable ink. I'm here, and I've always been here. Springville, Joe's garage, across from the Sit-O. Even though they told me life was elsewhere, slow string of cars behind tanker trucks, sun a yard above the trees, smell of diesel and fresh mowed grass. Even though they told me no matter how far I'd have to go to make myself here with my ear against these hills, carbon exhaust plume from a dump truck swallows me as I'm writing this in my pocket notebook. Never mind the trucks. This story has been written already in the insect trails under bark and stones, in the rippling night glow and morning chemtrails, in boot soles and tired tread. Story underneath the story, as trees be my witness, crawling out of its skin, a map water runs through. Nothing happens fast or slow. No one by one, we sign the gas lease. You wake up one morning, even though you didn't sign, you've signed. In the furrows, huge trucks frack into our 2-lane asphalt, chewed up berm, washed out gullies, vitriol. Here's what scares us. We don't know what's going on. We know what's going on, but we don't know all of what's going on. We know what's going on, but we don't know who's doing it. I mean, we know who's doing it, but we don't know who exactly is doing it. We don't know their names. We only know the company names. The why is obvious. It's the how that leaves us a lot of questions. Even when they explain it to us, even when their spokesperson goes on TV, even when they parade their heavy equipment past our farmhouses at breakneck speeds, even when they let us watch from the fence in our cars, afraid to get out, especially when they come to our door with papers to sign. Climbing down into an excavated gorge, crow caws 3 times overhead, stumbling over loose rock. Yesterday at this time, I was teaching students at the high school about inheritance, digging in with the sides of my desert boots to keep balance, not waiting around for someone to croak to get their dough, but what's handed you from your folks, these hills, cricks, and woods. Across lacerated bucket loader tread, For 2 days, I watched the backhoe bang and chip at this swatch of rock, step through and walk into. We own this. We don't own this. These are hard decisions between the haves and the used to haves. Night air sputters from the flare of a gas rig burn-off. Shadows of spindly trees spasm the side of a barn. Its weathered splints quicken the wavering tall grass. Before the gas came in, there was no change for years and years and years. That's one thing. It's beautiful country all around here, but that's all we got, and they're tearing it up. Around here, even the GPS don't work. Most of the maps, the current road maps, most of the names of the roads are wrong. It just comes down to the old-fashioned, take a left at the red broken down Ford truck. Until 2 years later, someone comes to get it. That was actually a marker for my brother's house. Sometimes it's like, slow down when you get to a rusty old guardrail. Once you get to the end, take a right. How to GPS a gas rig. Field mist rises into a sliver moon. Cloud wisps like deep forest birds scattered into a clearing, unaccustomed to so much light. Kokomo Bill once told me the coyote standing in the middle of the road past sunup was disoriented from last night's full moon. Too much light. Just like what we've got along the pipeline, all of us disoriented, staring into the trench. This getting older thing. Here's something I know. The way water in its own scaly time cuts through rock. One way to tell is to cut it in half, count the rings. Another way is to press your ear to it. Better yet, with a glass to your ear. You can hear every word spoken on the other side. The trees have been doing this with their roots. The insects underneath the bark, scrawling it down. Thank you.
Just interested in perhaps what each of you might describe as what you think the difference between prose and poetry might be.
I think it's a great question, and it's a very pertinent one, especially now where we see a lot of hybridization and cross-genre books like Anne Carson and Claudia Rankine's Lyric, which is a wonderful book, but it also asks that question, what is prose, what is poetry? For me, poetry has to work on the ear in some way. It has to leave some sort of residue on you after reading it or hearing it, so that even though they might be very understandable words that are common, words that we all use, that we all understand, that we might even speak to each other in a formal or informal way, they have to be, in some way, I think, elevated, transformed, whether it's in that line, whether it's a short line, long line, the syntax, or some way it has to be slightly transformed from the everyday. So perhaps it's an overall feeling where you have a prose-like, even in a prose poem, a prose-like feeling, but then at the end of the piece, there's something slightly different than perhaps the way that you started. But I guess for me, that would be the answer, that it has to work on the ear in some way, and it has to have some sort of music, some musicality. Not all the time, but that's a clue as to the fact that it's doing something poetic, and that there has to be some sort of elevation of language.
Should we each answer that one? Thank you. That sums it up. And, as for me, writing poetry, I mean the music part, the melody. A poem I think has to contain a melody, When I write prose, I'm very anal retentive about punctuation, and when I write poetry, I'm not, for myself.
A poem isn't a story, it's a moment of a story. And within a poem, there are many moments of many stories. The Japanese haibun is a great writing exercise where you write the story first and then glean out of it the poem. And the comparison between the two is a word sculpture, the chiseling down of language to create an object that is the moment of the story.
Any other ones out there?
How do all of you feel right now in terms of our school districts at all celebrating poetry? Are students exposed to it both as readers or writers? Is it something that when education's cut back, is poetry among the programs that are being cut back? And if so, how could we as a country refocus our attention and towards poetry and the importance not only of poetry but the arts?
Well, I'll take that one first, then we'll go around, I guess. My view of poetry in schools has always been kind of corrupted, as my view of the way history is taught in schools is that often the life is squashed out of it and it's turned into something kind of lifeless and not organic. I mean, in my view of poetry, there's one rule: there are no rules, and that often doesn't fly in academic circles. As far as the poetry in schools go, I know around here there are quite a few things that go on with poetry with students, and much to the credit of a lot of the local teachers that do things with the slams and such things, of which I'm not personally a big fan, but I do admire that it's being done, and at least there's something out there. I mean, I make distinctions in types of poetry that maybe others don't. But at least something's being done in that way, and in that sense, allowing for some organic expression of this, from the students. I think the best poetry in schools is always going to be the stuff that you never hear, that is in a box somewhere in some kid's desk drawer at home.
For over 25 years, I taught in the Poet in the Schools program in schools from elementary school to prison. And it was an experience of personal spontaneous combustion to witness in the class kids being able to speak from their information instead of the information from textbooks. And it was a monumental program and experience until No Child Left Behind came along and blew us all out of the water. Now, I know there are teachers involved with Poetry Out Loud, which is a national poetry experience of recitation of great poems. And I know communities have hip-hop scene and spoken word and poetry slams, which takes poetry back to the oral tradition, where we're based out of a literary tradition, and which is both experiences involve sitting for long hours alone with your head bowed over a sheet of paper, struggling over what words, what rhythms, what rhymes, and a tradition that all poets from the beginning of time have lived through. So I don't know if schools are ever going to pick up where the artists and the poets going into the classroom left off, but I find the communities are really vibrant with poetry scenes, such as the Mulberry Poets here and whatever hip-hop slam scenes there are.
Yeah, I would just add to that, I think individual teachers that I've had at Scranton High School do a great job of using the month of April to go deeper, to take a deeper dive in it. That's why I think national category for it is a wonderful thing. It's just gives it that little extra special focus and builds community around it. And I think anything that builds community is really positive. And I had the great privilege of working with teens and young adults when I lived in New Orleans a few years ago, teaching creative writing and poetry workshops. And a lot of those students had post-traumatic stress, PTSD related to Hurricane Katrina. And through poetry workshops, there was a lot of self-empowerment, exploration, communication. It was wonderfully edifying. And the more, the better. Whether it's New Orleans, Scranton, the more poetry that we can do as a community, you get to know your neighbors, get to know yourself. Any other questions? Poetry Month, writing process?
How do each of you start a poem? Does your process vary from piece to piece, or is there, a process you generally go through to begin?
It's a great question. For me, and I'll just start and pass the mic down, for the example, the Scranton Lace poem, I've always been obsessed with that building and the patina and the ways of seeing and what it represents, what it had represented, what it might represent in the future, looking at it sideways, forwards, backwards. So in that sense, it was a place, a physical space, as well as the emotional and psychic space of that. So it was a thing, a tangible thing. And sometimes it's a feeling. For example, with the autobiography of Ursula, I was thinking about anti-heroes and our current obsession with anti-heroes, whether it's the show like Breaking Bad or something that, like The Sopranos, for example, we hear about the flawed characters that are both the hero and the villain. So it was a concept in that poem. So it really varies, but usually it's something extremely strong that holds my curiosity. So whether it's a place, a person, or a concept.
In my case, I would say it's almost always some spark that I had no preconceived idea of. That last poem that I read, Bloodline, I can remember specifically I was at a red light, and for some reason the first couple lines occurred to me, and I just went and I pulled over and I wrote that poem. I had no idea why that occurred to me. And then it seemed to make sense. I stuck it in the drawer, and then after 9/11, I thought, like, why did I write that? It came to me for, I don't know why, but almost as a warning or a threat, I don't know. But usually that's something lurking beneath your consciousness that all of a sudden a line will come to you, and then it just kind of builds itself. And I don't so much write poetry as I just allow these words to find themselves onto the page, and hopefully I'm there to write them accurately.
My most often asked question when I was a kid in school was, what's this got to do with me? And it was the easiest question to blow off and go put my mind somewhere else. The face in the electrical socket got really interesting. The eye in the grain of the door got really interesting. And the paper clips in the carpet got really interesting. I spent my entire life in school studying objects and discarded finds. Later in my life, I realized that once I got engaged with the answer of that question, what's this got to do with me? That was the source of my poetry. And all of those discarded finds became the object of my poems. In my later life, in my travels, my most often asked question is, where am I and who are these people? And in my attempt to answer that, my poems come.
My other question is related to my growing up in West Scranton as the daughter of immigrants from Italy and from England. in the 50s, my brother in the 40s, and thinking about the oral history and the oral storytelling and how it could relate to the artists it created in the generations to come. I think it's a very powerful idea of what my grandmother taught me about her culture in Italy, and my father from and grandfather from England. And do you feel, each one of you, that it has had an experience and an influence in your work, in your art?
I grew up in Norton Avenue in Dallas. My backyard ended at the gate of heaven. On my street, Swedish was spoken in the Peterson house across the street. Welsh was spoken up the street in the Thomas family. Radziski spoke Polish. Vitali spoke Italian. Hungarian was spoken in my house. And we were sent to high school to learn French and Spanish. There was a strong belief that life was elsewhere. And for my entire childhood in the 50s, that was the serious message. You're going to go away to college, and you're going to establish whatever life you need elsewhere. And it wasn't until I was part of a poetry scene and I discovered the poets in Missoula, Montana, who valued place as the origin of poetry, sense of place, knowledge of place, respect of the place you come from. Their attitude was, if you don't know the names of all the flowers, plants, birds, and trees where you're from, you don't really live there. And working with these poets and learning to become who I've become drove me to come home and come looking for myself in the slag heaps and the dog holes and the gas rig flares. So there was a serious sense of place that our parents didn't value because they grew up in the middle of an industry that not only ravaged the earth, but ravaged the people. The gouged earth, the gouged people became a reflection of an industry, and the storefronts and the abandonment, the entire abandonment that we all felt in the coal region. So I don't know. All of a sudden, Alex Haley comes out with Roots, and everybody's concerned now about their heritage and that, which is a great thing. But before that, sure, we ate good food. The last to go, besides our names, was the names of our foods, the holubkis, the pierogis, the golomkis. So I like it, yes, there's oral history, but I don't believe I inherited a sense of oral history or history other than life is elsewhere.
I think that oral storytelling means many different things to many different people, and as I traveled through college and after college, you can, whether you're in Vietnam or England, France, there's definitely a different sense of place and priority and what stories get passed down. That's always been very interesting to me. I think what's been most compelling and interesting to me is the act of being a listener, and I've talked about this a lot. The more that I write, the more I understand about my own process of listening and why certain things jump out at me and capture my attention and arrest me versus other things that I don't remember. And it's led me to think very deeply about my relationship with sound and why sound is so interesting to me. The sound of water, the sound of heels along a floor, the sound of wind against the window. And I think perhaps that's my greatest sense of inheritance is is listening. And who am I as a person that actively listens and actively synthesizes and then finds meaning within the sounds that I'm hearing, whether it's language, whether it's song, through travel. After I return from a journey, what are the things that I remember the most? And then go deeply into that. So I think that's probably the biggest influence in terms of being a listener. Not necessarily the story, but just the sensorial and multisensorial experience of it. Do you want to answer that, or?
Well, just, I know we have to kind of wrap it up, so that would be the last question. I just would make one comment about growing up in Scranton. Blues from Paradise is kind of an ironic title for that. I've lived here my whole life. I love Scranton. I love this area with all the grit and soot and beauty and hatred and idiosyncrasies and everything that just mills around in this microcosm that we live in Scranton. And really, at least for me as a poet and as a person generally, everything I need is within a very short driving distance for me. And when I put together, as you see, a lot of the poems have to do with Scranton and in a sense, kind of eschewing the history that made us what we are, kind of stepping away from it and being almost ashamed of it. I'm not. I think it's to be celebrated, and Craig and I agree on that, and I guess Margot as well, that it's something that we should cherish and honor, that, you know, things were hard and things were ruined, and can we save them? Who knows? But give it a try, and that's why I called it Blues from Paradise. But in any case, I think we all share that, and I hope you guys enjoy this as much as I did. This is a really fun thing, and for April Poetry Month, on behalf of Electric City Television, thank you guys for coming and for you guys participating, and hopefully we'll get to do this annually. We'll do this next year, next Poetry Month in April. Thank you. Is that a wrap?